Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into a world of concrete walls, thin blankets, and the strangely soothing monotony of everyday life in the Soviet Union. You wake slowly, still wrapped in that half-dream feeling, as a pale winter light pushes through the small window of your Khrushchevka apartment. The glass fogs slightly with your breath. The radiator clanks once loud enough to sound alive, but not loud enough to promise it will actually work this morning. And you already know, whatever warmth it gives, you'll just take. Outside your door, you hear the muffled shuffle of other early risers in this 5-story maze of identical homes. A kettle whistles in someone else's kitchen. Somebody coughs. Somebody's child is practicing wooden recorder again, which is probably the earliest evidence of state-sanctioned psychological warfare. You stretch, feeling the chill of the room cling to your arms, and you think, yep. Get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing how far our sleepy little community reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You roll out of bed, your feet touching the chilly linoleum floor. The apartment around you is compact, cozy if you're generous, cramped if you're honest. The Khrushchevka wasn't designed for beauty. It was designed to be built quickly, cheaply, and in enormous numbers. Historians still argue whether their efficiency was ingenious or just slightly depressing, but inside these walls, this is the world you know. The ceiling is low enough that stretching feels like a negotiation. Your bedroom doubles as your living room, which also doubles as your workspace, and occasionally triples as the room where relatives sleep during holidays because everyone visits, even though no one has space. A single wardrobe stands against one wall, its door slightly warped from humidity. You open it and stare at the predictable lineup. The same shirts, the same trousers, everything neutral, everything functional. Fashion, in your case, is less an act of expression and more like a quiet truce with a system that never asked your opinion. As you dress, you catch a faint smell drifting from the shared stairwell, someone frying onions, someone boiling buckwheat, someone attempting instant coffee that tastes suspiciously like hot water with ambition. Those smells travel freely in buildings like this. Privacy is a capitalist luxury, after all. In the tiny kitchen, you light the gas stove with a match that flares too bright in the dim room. The kettle rattles as it heats, sounding like it's gossiping with itself. You drop a sugar cube into your glass mug. It fizzes slightly, a small moment of joy. Soviet mornings often begin like this. Simple routines stitched together with patience. And repetition. Lots of repetition. The quirky tidbit no one warns you about. Your spoon will become your most loyal possession. You stir tea with it, mash potatoes with it, flip cutlets with it. If thumbs are essential to humans, spoons are essential to Soviets. You take your first sip. The warmth spreads through your chest. Outside the frosted window, a thin plume of chimney smoke drifts up into the grey sky, dissolving like a whispered promise that today might be manageable. You sit at the small table, an object barely large enough for 2 adults, but somehow still responsible for hosting entire family dinners. You look around your kitchen. The patterned oilcloth on the table, the single flower you've been attempting to keep alive, the wooden salt shaker shaped like a matryoshka. These items are humble, but they're yours. And in a world where everyone has nearly the same furniture, the same kettles, the same curtains, the tiniest uniqueness feels like rebellion. Your thoughts drift. You remember that the Khrushchevka itself was built as part of a massive housing campaign, meant to drag families out of communal apartments and into modern living. Historians still argue whether this program truly improved life, or simply replaced one set of problems with another. But this is where you landed: a private kitchen, your own door, your own 4 walls. A miracle, if you ask the older generation. You finish your tea just as the radiator decides to release a brief sigh of warmth, like it's apologizing for oversleeping. You slip into your boots, sturdy, worn, dependable, and pull on your coat. The zipper snags halfway down, as usual. Soviet clothing has personality, mostly stubbornness. When you open the apartment door, the stairwell greets you with its signature perfume. Damp concrete, old paint, and the distant scent of cabbage. Someone cooked 3 days ago, but which refuses to leave. A neighbor nods at you on the landing. This is the kind of building where you know everyone's footsteps by heart. whether you want to or not. As you step outside, a blast of cold air hits your face, sharp enough to wake the deepest sleepers. Snow dusts the ground. Your breath forms ghosts in the morning air. The Khrushchevka behind you stands in a row of identical buildings, each like a grey Lego block in a neighborhood designed by someone with a deep love of geometry but mild disdain for whimsy. You take a moment to breathe. The sky is a gentle, washed-out white. Somewhere in the distance, a factory horn echoes. You hear the crunch of snow beneath other commuters' shoes. A dog trots by, tail wagging, wearing an expression that suggests it's more optimistic about the day than you are. You start walking along the path, carved through the snow by hundreds of footsteps before yours. Your day is beginning, the way it has hundreds of times. Predictable, steady, shaped by routines you didn't choose but somehow comforting in their familiarity. And here, in the quiet of the morning, with your breath fogging the air and the city slowly waking, you settle into the rhythm of Soviet life, a rhythm you'll follow until night returns. You step out into the cold morning with your hands tucked deep into your pockets, following the same worn path your neighbors take each day. The Soviet Union might not give you much variety in the mornings, but it does offer one universal truth. If something is worth having, there's probably a line for it. And today, like most days, you're heading straight into one. The bus stop sits at the corner of your district, a concrete shelter with peeling paint, a single flickering light bulb, and a bench that looks like it has personally survived 3 wars. A handful of people already stand beneath it, huddled together like penguins, preparing for the longest migration of their lives. Their breath forms little clouds in the air. No one talks yet. It's too early for opinions. You join them, shifting into the quiet choreography of queue culture. Queuing isn't merely an action here, it's a social institution, an unspoken camaraderie built on mutual suffering. Historians still argue whether Soviet lines created community or resigned despair. But you know the truth. They built character, and they taught patience. And occasionally, they taught you new and creative curse words, whispered under someone's breath when the line moved backward for reasons unknown. A woman ahead of you glances over her shoulder, eyes narrowing as she silently assesses whether you're respecting queue etiquette. You nod politely, indicating you understand rule has shown of Soviet society. Never anger a seasoned babushka in a line. Their power is absolute. Their elbows are sharp. Their sense of justice is terrifyingly precise. Snowflakes drift lazily from the sky, soft and steady. You pull your scarf higher around your face. A man to your left mutters, "Butter at the Central Market today." You raise an eyebrow. That's the quirky tidbit you've been waiting for. Butter is rare enough that whenever a rumor surfaces, it spreads faster than any official announcement. Before you even process the thought, 3 people have already asked the man for details. He shrugs noncommittally, classic. The black market gossip network is always vague, always dramatic, and somehow always correct. The bus arrives with a metallic groan, like it just woke up from a nap it didn't enjoy. The doors open with a hiss, and everyone surges forward in controlled chaos. You try to enter gently, but someone behind you pushes with that specific Soviet decisiveness that communicates. We are all getting on this bus, and there is no universe in which you stop us. Inside, the heat hits you like a steam cloud. Windows are fogged over from breath and damp coats. The interior smells like wool, diesel, and lives lived hurriedly. You grab a strap overhead, feeling the sway as the bus lurches forward. Pressed between 2 strangers, you settle into the gentle rocking that almost counts as ASMR if you're generous. Your glasses fog slightly. A young boy next to you holds a jar containing something suspiciously resembling pickles. You pretend not to notice. Your entire life here is built on pretending not to notice. As the bus crawls through the grey streets, you watch people standing in other lines. One outside a bakery, one outside a pharmacy, one outside a shop that hasn't opened yet but which, by its window display, might sell 2 types of socks and a broken vacuum. It's not that the Soviet Union enjoys making things difficult, it's just that difficulty is free, and therefore very abundant. You hop off near the Central Market, where lines braid together in every direction like threads on a loom. Someone is selling apples. Someone else is haggling for potatoes like they're negotiating a nuclear treaty. You hear snippets of conversation floating through the cold air, complaints about prices, speculations about shortages, gossip about whose cousin got arrested for hoarding sausages. Just the usual. You join yet another queue, this time stretching outside a food shop. Inside, You know the shelves will look like a minimalist art exhibit titled The Concept of Scarcity. A few jars here, a few cans there, enough space between items to fit a family of raccoons. But you wait anyway. Waiting is what life teaches you, to stand still and let time pass while hoping for something, anything to appear. It's the patience Olympics, and everyone in this line is a champion. The woman in front of you sighs and says, "Last week, they had oranges." You nod sympathetically. Oranges are practically mythological at this point. Historians still argue whether Soviet children genuinely believed citrus fruits were imaginary or simply seasonal miracles. You shuffle forward a little, the cold creeping into your boots. But there's a comfort in this monotony. A strange calm found only in shared inconvenience. You look around and realize something else. These lines aren't just about goods, they're about stories. People meet here, talk here, vent here, laugh here. The line is the Soviet version of a social network, except slower and with fewer cat photos. The door finally opens, and you step inside. The shop clerk, wrapped in a brown apron and infinite weariness, barely looks up. You grab what's available, a loaf of dense bread, a small packet of tea, a tin of sprats, and you're proud of yourself. Your haul isn't good, but it's something. Back outside, a gust of wind carries that unmistakable scent of burning coal. You pull your coat tighter, and as you walk away from the marketplace, you realize the queues have already begun forming again. New rumors, new hopes, new frustrations. You take a deep breath. This is daily life, Soviet-style slow, repetitive, but full of tiny human moments that stitch the hours together. And as you head toward your next destination, leaving the murmuring lines behind, you feel yourself settling deeper into this world where time moves at its own deliberate pace. You leave the marketplace behind and head toward the tram stop, your arms full of your modest morning haul. The sidewalk is slick with packed snow, the kind that crunches under your boots in a strangely satisfying way like nature's bubble wrap. You follow the steady stream of bundled-up commuters moving through the grey morning, everyone shuffling with that shared, unspoken understanding. The commute will be long, crowded, and vaguely existential. But hey, at least it's predictable. Predictability is basically a warm blanket in the Soviet Union. The tram screeches around the corner, sparks flickering from its overhead wires. It looks tired, which is exactly the energy you're bringing today. As it hisses to a stop, people crowd closer. A man beside you mutters, something resembling a prayer, which is funny because everyone knows religion is discouraged, but tight spaces apparently make everyone spiritual. You board the tram, pushing gently but firmly, because this is not the place for timid souls. The interior is packed, every seat taken, every strap occupied, every personal bubble popped. You grab a cold metal rail and brace yourself as the tram jolts forward. Your body rocks backward, then forward, like a bowing ceremony you didn't agree to. The windows are fogged again. The Soviet Union loves to fog windows. It's practically a national hobby. On the glass, someone draws a smiley face with their mitten, and you appreciate the optimism. The driver announces something over the loudspeaker, but it sounds like he's speaking through a wool scarf inside a tin can 3 miles away. You nod anyway, pretending you understood. Historians still argue whether Soviet public transportation was brilliantly efficient or mildly chaotic. But you've decided it's both. It's like a dependable friend who always shows up, just not exactly when or how you expect. As the tram rattles along, you peer out into the city. Snow-dusted rooftops, rows of identical apartment blocks standing shoulder to shoulder like exhausted soldiers. Billboards featuring cheerful workers raising tools triumphantly in the air. The irony is strong, considering half the people on this tram are doing everything they can to avoid making eye contact or raising anything triumphantly, especially this early. A woman seated beneath the heater stares at you for a moment before nodding at the bag in your hand. "Bread today?" she asks. You nod. "And sprats." She whistles softly, impressed. "Luxury." You both know she's joking. Sprats are basically the Soviet equivalent of a consolation prize, but you appreciate the enthusiasm. Small victories need cheerleaders. A boy in a fur hat squeezes past you, carrying what looks like an entire frozen chicken wrapped in newspaper. He accidentally bumps your arm and apologizes profusely. You wave it off. The quirky tidbit of tram culture. Children often carry groceries because they take up less space, and because adults know the universal truth, people are less likely to elbow a child holding poultry. Outside, the city shifts from residential to industrial. Tall chimneys rise like bleak spires, spilling ribbons of smoke into the pale sky. You smell coal, warm metal, and that distinct factory scent that clings to the air on winter mornings. Even from inside the tram, it feels like stepping closer to the heartbeat of the city, steady, relentless, slightly overworked. The tram slows, then stops, then groans, then moves again in a rhythm you've learned to trust. You get jostled sideways by a sudden lurch, nearly falling into a man reading Pravda. He doesn't look bothered. In fact, he barely notices. You suspect he's been preparing for this moment his entire commuting career. The tram eventually empties enough that you can reposition yourself near a window. You wipe a small circle clear with your glove and watch the world blur by people rushing through the cold, a stray dog trotting along with casual confidence, a woman pulling a sled loaded with firewood. You feel a softness settle over you, the kind that comes with early morning exhaustion and the hypnotic rattle of steel on steel. There's something oddly comforting about this commute. It's crowded, it's loud, it's slow, but it's also a shared ritual. A moment in the day when everyone becomes part of the same story, even if just for a fleeting ride. And here, crammed between strangers with nowhere to move, you feel that strange Soviet closeness that's neither friendship nor anonymity, but something balanced exactly in between. The tram rounds its final turn and pulls into your stop with a squeal that makes your teeth vibrate. You step off into the cold air, adjusting your coat. Steam rises from the tram's undercarriage like it's exhaling in relief after barely surviving another rush hour. You relate to it deeply. Ahead lies the industrial district. Rows of red brick buildings, iron gates, and warehouses that seem determined to absorb all sunlight. It's where the day really begins, the place everyone's trudging toward with resigned determination. You shift your bag of groceries, take a steadying breath, and walk forward. The grey streets stretch toward the factories, and the rhythm of your footsteps echoes softly in the crisp morning air. Your commute is complete, but the workday is just beginning. You push through the cold toward the factory gate, its metal frame towering above you like a stern reminder that productivity is the closest thing the Soviet Union has to a national religion. A guard in a thick coat nods at you, barely glancing up as you pass. His expression says he's been awake since before the concept of time was invented. You slip inside with the flow of workers' boots thumping, breath clouding, shoulders hunched against the morning chill. Inside the main hall, warmth hits you like a wall. Not cozy warmth, more like the heavy, industrial kind that smells faintly of oil, sweat, metal shavings, and whatever machine decided to leak overnight. The air hums with energy, as if the building itself is gearing up for another day of grinding labor. You find your workstation easily. Everyone here could navigate these aisles blindfolded. Sometimes it feels like you already do. You hang your coat on a hook that wobbles dangerously, then set your bag down. The machinery around you is already waking up, belt drives whirring, gears clacking, motors rumbling with that deep mechanical certainty that drowns out most other thoughts. It's almost hypnotic. If ASMR existed here, it would sound like this. A symphony of clattering steel and humming engines. Comforting in its own rough way. A co-worker waves at you, a man with a mustache so magnificent it defies workplace safety regulations. "Morning," he grunts, handing you a pair of gloves that have clearly lived 100 lives. "Machine 3 is moody today." You laugh softly. Machines here are always moody. It's their primary personality trait. Historians still argue whether Soviet factories were underfunded or just cursed, but you've concluded the answer is yes. You switch on your equipment, listening to the sputter before the steady hum takes over. The vibration travels through your hands into your bones. It's familiar, repetitive, almost meditative. You slip into the rhythm, instinctively grip, guide, release, repeat, until the task stops feeling like work and more like muscle memory controlling your body on autopilot. Your mind wanders, as it always does. You think about breakfast, the weather, that rumor about butter, the fact that your neighbor's cat seems to judge you more harshly than any official committee ever has. You think about how this factory has seen multiple leaders, reforms, shortages, overhauls, and yet your station has remained exactly the same. It's weirdly comforting, like the Soviet version of a stable relationship. A supervisor strolls by, clipboard in hand, wearing the expression of someone who's chronically unimpressed by nature. He glances at your output, nods once, which counts as effusive praise in this environment, and moves on. You take the compliment silently. Out loud approval is rare, and might cause a stampede. The quirky tidbit you remember at moments like this. Soviet factories often had shock worker competitions, friendly rivalries where employees tried to outproduce one another. The reward? Usually a certificate, a handshake, maybe a celebratory mention at a meeting. No yachts, no bonuses, no Employee of the Month parking spots. Just bragging rights, which, oddly enough, people cherished. It's amazing what humans will fight for when everything else is rationed. The hours begin to slide by in a warm mechanical haze. You steal quick glances at the wall clock, an ancient thing with yellowed hands that always looks 5 minutes away from retirement. You're convinced it runs slower during winter. Time here is subjective anyway, stretched out by routine and repetition until it feels syrupy. A radio crackles overhead with music, though calling it music might be generous. It's cheerful Soviet marching tunes, the kind meant to keep spirits high and productivity higher. You smile to yourself. There's something charming about songs that try so hard to keep you upbeat while your arms feel like damp noodles from lifting metal parts all morning. Your mustached co-worker approaches again, wiping his hands on a rag. "Break soon," he says with a grin. He says this every day, as if the concept of taking a break is a rare phenomenon you might forget. And honestly, sometimes you do. Work has a way of swallowing time whole. When the break whistle blows, you stretch your back until it pops like a vintage record. Workers scatter some heading for tea, others for the smoking corner. A few brave souls performing fast repairs on their machinery in hopes of preventing catastrophic breakdowns later. You join a small group gathered near a window so frosty it looks like the inside of a freezer. Someone passes around a jar of pickles. Another worker unwraps a sandwich that somehow smells exactly like yesterday's sandwich. You sip tea from your metal cup, savoring its heat. Conversations flow easily in these small pockets of time. Complaints about shortages, jokes about factory gossip, stories about whose cousin bribed whom for extra firewood. "Did you hear?" someone asks. They say a new model machine is coming next year. This sparks immediate debate. Next year could mean anything from tomorrow to never. Historians still argue whether Soviet timelines were intentionally vague or just chronically optimistic. You shake your head with a smile. These debates are as eternal as the factory itself. Break ends, and you return to your machine. The afternoon passes in the same rhythmic cycle. The whir of belts, the chatter of co-workers, the occasional burst of steam that smells like hot metal and ambition. You wipe sweat from your forehead despite the cold outside. Factories run warm not because they're luxurious, but because thousands of moving parts generate enough heat to toast a loaf of bread. By the time your shift nears its end, your muscles ache in familiar ways. But there's pride woven into the exhaustion. You've shaped something today, maybe a component for a tractor, maybe for a stove, maybe for a machine that will break down next month and be repaired 10 times before being retired. It doesn't really matter. Your hands contributed to something real. As you collect your coat and bag, you glance one last time at the machines settling into silence. The day's work is done. Tomorrow, the cycle begins again. Predictable, steady, endless, but in this strange way, comforting. You step outside into the cold evening air, the factory's warmth fading behind you like the last note of a song. You step out of the factory into the crisp, late-day air, your breath forming clouds as you pull your coat tighter. Your body feels pleasantly heavy, the kind of tired that comes from repetitive work and the slow grind of machinery humming in your bones. Your mind drifts naturally toward the next reliable ritual of the day. Lunch in the factory canteen, where the menus may not change often, but the conversations always do. The path to the canteen is a short walk across the yard, past rows of stacked crates and a forklift that always seems to be broken, yet somehow always moves. You push open the steel door and are immediately greeted by a wave of warmth mixed with the unmistakable scent of boiled potatoes and cabbage. It's not glamorous, but it's familiar, like being reunited with an old friend who happens to be very enthusiastic about root vegetables. Inside, the canteen buzzes with life. Workers sit at long communal tables, their coats draped over chairs, steam rising from their bowls. Trays clatter, spoons tap against enamel cups, and someone at the far end is already retelling a story with unnecessary volume. This is the unofficial social hub of the factory, a place where the food might be bland, but the gossip is perfectly seasoned. You grab a tray and join the line, which moves briskly thanks to a cafeteria worker who could win Olympic gold in ladle efficiency. She plops a portion of mashed potatoes onto your plate with the kind of precision that suggests years of experience and maybe mild telepathy. On her left sits a tray of Kotletta fried meat patties that are roughly 40% meat, 40% breadcrumbs, 10% mystery, and 10% hope. You take one. You also grab a small side of beet salad because vitamins are theoretically important. At the drink station, you pour yourself a glass of compote, its murky sweetness reminding you of childhood and questionable school lunches. You take your tray to an open seat near the window. The pane is so frosted it could double as an impressionist painting of winter. Your mustached co-worker plops down across from you. Same menu again, he sighs dramatically, poking his Kotletta as if waiting for it to attack. You shrug. Consistency builds character. He snorts. So does starvation. You both laugh. Light humor your daily seasoning. As you take your first bite of potatoes, you reflect on one of the more mainstream facts about Soviet canteens. They were designed to keep workers fueled, not delighted. Meals were planned on a massive scale, calibrated for calories, cost, and availability. Historians still argue whether this system was admirably efficient or merely a culinary endurance test. You suspect the truth lies somewhere between. The Kotletta tastes fine. Not delicious, not terrible, just fine. But the texture is strangely comforting, and today's quirky tidbit floats into your mind. Some canteens were rumored to stretch their meat supply with things like soaked bread, ground peas, or whatever ingredient hadn't gone missing that week. You're pretty sure today's Kotletta contains at least one ingredient not mentioned on any official list, but as long as it's edible, you don't ask questions. A woman at the next table leans over and says, "Did you hear about the bakery on Lenin Street? They got fresh loaves yesterday, real soft ones." You blink? Fresh bread? Soft? That's like hearing someone spotted a unicorn in the wild. Your coworker leans in, eyes wide. "Is it true?" he asks. The woman shrugs. "Maybe. Maybe not. You know how rumors are." You nod. In this world, half of life is rumor, and the other half is waiting in line based on rumor. The conversation flows easily around you, someone complaining about their radiator making strange noises, someone else describing their kid's school play, another person announcing they might get a rare week off this summer to visit a cousin at a dacha. The canteen is the great equalizer. No matter your rank, your role, or your mood, everyone ends up eating the same potatoes. You sip your compote, its sugary warmth thawing the last bits of winter clinging to your throat. You think about how much time is spent in places like this: canteens, queues, communal spaces. Places that force you to be part of a community, whether you want to or not. There's comfort in the predictability, even if it sometimes feels overwhelming. As you finish your meal, you notice a poster near the back wall. A cheerful worker holding a bowl of soup under the slogan, "Healthy food builds a healthy nation." The worker's smile is enormous, suspiciously enormous. No one eating in this canteen today looks that enthusiastic. Historians still argue whether propaganda artists ever actually visited workplaces or just guessed what happiness looked like. You stand, placing your tray on the return cart, and wipe your hands on a paper napkin so thin it dissolves instantly. Lunch may not be glamorous, but it does its job. It fills your stomach, warms your bones, and gives your mind a few minutes to breathe. Outside, the day is already tilting toward afternoon. Workers shuffle back to their stations, weighed down by food and routine, but buoyed by conversation. You take one last glance through the frosted window. Snow drifts lazily in the air, settling on the ground like powdered sugar over an imperfect cake. You exhale slowly and step out of the canteen, ready to blend back into the steady rhythm of your workday. The factory hum is waiting, as constant and familiar as ever. You step back into the factory yard, the cold air stinging your cheeks as your stomach settles into that post-canteen heaviness, the kind of fullness that feels less like nourishment and more like being gently weighted down with mashed potatoes. As you walk toward the main street, you notice something you can't escape in the Soviet Union. No matter where you go, propaganda. It's everywhere. On walls, on billboards, on buses, in newspapers, on TV, on the sides of stairwells. If there's a flat surface, there's probably a slogan stuck to it. You pause at the pedestrian crossing, where a bright red poster hangs crookedly on a wall. It shows a smiling worker holding a wrench the size of a small tree, accompanied by the cheerful line, "Labor is the pride of the nation." He looks suspiciously enthusiastic, considering he's wearing overalls in the dead of winter. You tug your scarf up, thinking that either he's made of stronger stuff than you, or the artist painted him inside a heated studio with extremely selective optimism. As you start walking again, you notice another sign. A woman with perfect waves of hair urging everyone to protect public property. You chuckle under your breath. Your factory's machinery breaks down twice a week. Public property needs all the protection it can get. This is the thing about Soviet propaganda. It's bold, it's bright, it's everywhere, and it's always telling you exactly how to feel. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume of posters was meant to inspire genuine unity or simply drown out individual thought in a sea of cheerful commands. But for you, it's more like the city's wallpaper, loud, colourful, and impossible to ignore even when you try. You pass a kiosk with newspapers displayed behind glass. Pravda sits front and center with a headline declaring soaring agricultural success. You smile because yesterday your co-worker spent 10 minutes describing how the potato shipment never arrived, and everyone blamed the regional manager, the weather, and possibly the moon. Reality and headlines enjoy their own separate vacations here. A man next to you mutters, "I'll believe it when potatoes fall from the sky." You grin. "Might be the only way we get them on time." He laughs softly, carefully. Jokes about shortages are safe. Jokes about leadership are, well, something you file under, "Let's not ruin our day." As you walk, you notice a smaller poster near a bus stop, half peeling in the cold. It features a stern teacher pointing at a chalkboard. Knowledge is the path to communism. You wonder if your old math teacher believed that, or if she simply enjoyed terrifying teenagers with pop quizzes. Probably both. A tram rattles past, and for a moment, you catch a glimpse of another poster inside it. A heroic family surrounded by wheat fields, staring into the distance like they've just seen the future, and it's extremely well lit. You quietly admire the artist's dedication to painting wheat, considering most city dwellers rarely see anything fresher than a few potatoes rolling around a market stall. Propaganda isn't limited to posters, though. It's woven into the soundscape too. You pass a loudspeaker mounted high on a lamppost. It crackles to life, filling the winter air with a chipper announcer discussing factory achievements and the importance of unity of purpose. The audio quality makes it sound like he's speaking from inside a tin bathtub, but the message is clear enough. You catch yourself smirking. Soviet public messaging always has that same tone, encouraging, triumphant, and just a bit disconnected from the mood of the people trudging through slushy streets with cold noses and broken zippers. The quirky tidbit you remember. Some regions installed loudspeakers that played morning announcements every single day, rain or shine. Apartment blocks woke up not to birdsong but to cheerful reminders about quotas. Imagine your alarm clock trying to convince you to work harder. You reach a small plaza, where a statue of a revolutionary leader stands proudly atop a pedestal. Snow has gathered on his shoulders like a misplaced shawl. You tip your head upward, considering how many of these statues exist across the country. Tens of thousands, probably. Historians still argue whether these monuments were intended as genuine inspiration or simply a reminder of who was always watching from above. A few kids run past, kicking up snow and laughing, one wearing a red pioneer scarf. He pretends the statue is saluting him. His friend imitates the pose, then slips on the ice. They collapse into giggles. Even propaganda can't suppress slapstick. You wander around the statue's base, reading the plaque even though you've seen it 100 times. The same quotes, the same dates, the same promises of a radiant future. You've grown used to the contrast between these grand statements and the modest reality of your own life. The queues, the shortages, the overcooked potatoes. But it's strange. The posters and statues create a rhythm in the city. Without them, it might feel emptier, quieter. Even if the messages are exaggerated, they paint the world with a certain boldness. You continue down the street. The setting sun paints the sky with muted shades of pink and orange, turning the propaganda posters into glowing silhouettes. You pass a group of workers talking softly beside a wall, shielding themselves from the wind. Their voices blend into the soft murmur of evening. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks, and in this moment, surrounded by prints of smiling workers and slogans promising greatness, you feel oddly grounded. Propaganda doesn't necessarily convince you, but it does accompany you. It's part of the architecture of your day, the visual soundtrack of your life. You've learned to read between the lines, to see the art beneath the message, to appreciate the colors even when you question the content. You step forward into the growing dusk, ready to drift toward whatever the next quiet ritual of your Soviet day has in store. You leave the plaza behind, your footsteps crunching across the snowy pavement as dusk thickens around the city. The streetlights blink on one by one, slowly, reluctantly, as if each bulb is deciding whether it feels emotionally prepared to participate today. Their dim yellow glow spreads across the grey buildings, giving everything a slightly cinematic melancholy. This is the hour when the day shifts gears, when people head home or linger in small pockets of the city to exchange whispers about the one thing more reliable than the weather: shortages. And where shortages exist, the black market inevitably follows, quiet, subtle, woven right into the fabric of everyday Soviet life. You turn into a narrow side street, unremarkable at first glance. A kiosk sits on the corner, its wooden panels peeling, its windows fogged from the tiny heater inside. But you're not here for the kiosk. You're here for the tiny ecosystem of whispered exchanges that orbit around it. You can already hear the soft hum of conversation. Low, careful, calculated. This is where you find the unofficial economy, the shadow sibling of the state system. Not the dramatic black market scenes you might imagine from movies, but the everyday kind: neighbors swapping goods, friends trading favors, co-workers passing along extras they somehow acquired. Historians still argue whether these informal exchanges kept the country functioning or quietly undermined the system. But to you, they feel less like rebellion and more like survival with a wink. As you approach, a man in a thick hat glances your way. He's not a dealer. He's a guy with connections who always knows someone who knows someone. Every neighborhood has one. You nod politely, a silent greeting, not a request. The rules here matter. You don't walk up and loudly declare, "I need coffee." That's how you get socially exiled, or stabbed by someone's glare. A woman emerges from the kiosk holding a small package, wrapped in brown paper. You know that look. Triumph mixed with extreme discretion. She hides the package inside her coat, like it's crown jewels. You wonder what she scored today. Real chocolate maybe? Imported stockings? Or the holy grail? Actual ground coffee? The possibilities flutter in your mind like contraband butterflies. You shift your weight and listen quietly. The conversations swirl around you. Friend from Minsk sent oranges. You got oranges? Oranges? Shh. Yes. 1 kilo. Maybe 2. But don't ask. Just don't ask. Someone nearby lowers his voice even further. My cousin's neighbor's aunt works at a warehouse. She can get canned peaches. Canned peaches. The myth, the legend, the dessert of champions. You haven't tasted one in years. You're 90% sure your last peach was in a dream. Your mustached co-worker appears suddenly. Apparently he had the same idea after work. He joins you with a grin. I heard someone's got matches, he whispers. As if matches are more illegal than state secrets. You laugh softly. The funny thing is, he's not wrong. Shortages cycle through items at random. 1 month it's sugar, the next it's boots. Then suddenly everyone becomes obsessed with finding decent light bulbs. Your quirky tidbit of the day floats into your mind. There was a time when so few pantyhose were available that women drew lines down the back of their legs with eyeliner to fake the look of seams. That's commitment. That's artistry. That's thirst for fashion meeting raw desperation. You and your co-worker stand quietly as a woman in a fur hat approaches the man with connections. She doesn't say anything. She just raises an eyebrow. He nods, reaches discreetly into his coat, and hands her a small paper roll. She slips him a few rubles. In any other country, this exchange might look terrifying. In the Soviet Union, it looks like Tuesday. Sometimes the black market items are simple soap that doesn't smell like sadness, razor blades that last longer than 2 shaves, margarine that spreads without tearing your bread. Other times, it's the glorious, forbidden stuff. Western jeans, vinyl records, even chewing gum. Historians still argue whether Western jeans represented freedom or simply better tailoring. But every teenager from Riga to Vladivostok wanted them. The man with connections glances your way again. You shake your head. You're not buying anything today. You came for the atmosphere, the human pulse, the strange comfort of people helping people under the table. The black market isn't sinister here. It's social glue. It's how birthdays happen, how holidays happen, how joy sneaks through the cracks. The cold deepens. Snow falls in soft flakes that melt on your collar. A woman walking past murmurs to her friend, "If you hear about coffee, tell me first." Her friend snorts. "You?" "I'm telling my sister first." Priorities. Your co-worker nudges you. Come on, he says. Let's get home before the buses stop pretending to run. You take one last look at the little Shadow Market World paper packages tucked into coats, quiet exchanges, hopeful eyes scanning the crowd for whispers of the next available something. It feels like a heartbeat, a soft, steady thump beneath the official rhythm of the city. You and your co-worker walk back toward the main street. Behind you, the murmur of hushed trades continues under the dim glow of a streetlight. Ahead of you, the world stretches into evening, full of routine and unpredictability in equal measure. You tuck your scarf tighter and step forward, blending seamlessly back into the flow of Soviet life where rules are strict, but workarounds, well, work. You and your co-worker part ways at the corner, waving briefly before heading toward your own building. Your boots crunch through the snow as you approach your Khrushchevka, its shape looming out of the dusk like a chunky concrete relic that's somehow both depressing and comforting. A single light flickers in the stairwell window, your unofficial welcome home sign. You climb the steps slowly, savoring the warmth inside after the evening chill. Your door creaks open, and instantly the familiar scents of your apartment greet you. A mix of tea leaves, old wood, and a hint of whatever your neighbor cooked 2 hours ago that has somehow infiltrated your walls. But before you settle fully into the calm of your own space, you hear the unmistakable murmur of voices echoing faintly through your corridor. Communal living is not an occasional inconvenience in the Soviet Union, it is the default state of existence. Even in buildings like yours, which technically count as private apartments, privacy is more of a gentle suggestion than a reality. You take off your coat, rubbing your arms to bring back warmth. When there's a knock, 3 soft taps, you open the door to find your elderly neighbor, Lyudmila Ivanovna, standing there with a pot that looks older than the concept of weather. "Do you have salt?" she asks, already stepping inside as if the answer is irrelevant. You smile and fetch the salt without hesitation. Salt is the unofficial currency of this building. That, and tea bags, and screwdrivers, and stories. She scoops a spoonful and sighs. "My son says he'll visit this weekend," she announces, which is the price of the salt. You get a life update in return. "That's wonderful," you say. "He'll probably bring laundry," she adds with a grimace. You both laugh. She leaves with her pot, and you close the door gently. Moments like this weave through your daily life, like threads in a fabric, small interruptions that somehow create the biggest sense of belonging. You move into your kitchen to heat water for tea. The kettle rattles, the gas stove clicks, and your apartment fills with the soft glow of the single overhead bulb. This little room has witnessed countless evenings like this, quiet, predictable, wrapped in a soft blanket of routine. As you wait for the kettle to boil, you hear footsteps upstairs, then a door slam, then someone shouting something about losing a slipper. You shake your head, smiling. You know these people by sound alone. In a Soviet apartment building, you could map your neighbors by footsteps, coughs, and the emotional intensity of their arguments. Historians still argue whether communal living built strong communities or chronic irritation, but you think the truth is a blend. Yes, you've heard your neighbors snoring through the floorboards more times than you can count. Yes, you know far too much about the marital conflicts of the couple on the second floor. But these same neighbors also share their pickles, fix your light switches, and help you haul heavy groceries up 5 flights of stairs when the elevator inevitably fails. The kettle whistles sharply, snapping you out of your thoughts. You pour the hot water over tea leaves and hold the cup between your hands. The steam warms your face. The smell is earthy, familiar, soothing. Just as you take your first sip, there's another knock, this one louder. You open the door to find your middle-aged neighbor, Victor, holding a radio with exposed wires hanging dramatically from the bottom. "It died," he announces mournfully. You stare at the radio. "Again?" He nods. "Again?" You step aside and let him in, because this is how it works. You borrow salt from Lyudmila, and Victor borrows your tools. And tomorrow, someone else will borrow your broom, your lighter, or your patience. You grab your toolbox while Victor sits at your kitchen table, leaning forward like a doctor awaiting grim news. You poke around inside the radio, tapping connections, adjusting wires, looking like you know what you're doing even if you're not entirely sure. It's the Soviet way. Everyone becomes a technician out of necessity. "There, you finally say, try it." He switches it on. The radio crackles for a moment, then bursts into life with a loud burst of patriotic music. Victor beams. You feel slightly heroic. He pats your shoulder. You're a good comrade. You shrug. Just don't tell the radio factory they'll recruit me. He laughs, thanks you, and leaves, carrying the radio triumphantly like a rescued pet. You finally sit down on your sofa bed hybrid, a piece of furniture that transforms with the enthusiasm of a reluctant transformer. You sip your tea slowly. Your apartment is quiet for a moment, peaceful, but you know that peace is temporary. This building breathes with life, and life is rarely still. And right on cue, distant yelling erupts from an upstairs neighbor. You catch only fragments. Where's my scarf? I don't know, check the dog. The dog doesn't wear scarves. Are you sure about that? You stifle a laugh. This building is a constant symphony of chaos, affection, and nonsense. You lean back, letting the warmth settle in your bones. Communal life isn't glamorous. It isn't clean. It isn't private. But it is full of stories, some loud, some quiet, all stitched together by the thin walls that connect you. And in a strange way, these shared walls cushion you from the loneliness that might otherwise creep in. There's comfort in knowing you're never completely alone, not when someone will always knock for salt, or scream about scarves, or blast patriotic songs at 8 p.m. You take another sip of tea. The lights flicker once, then settle. Outside, the snow continues to fall softly, muffling the sounds of the world beyond your building. Here, in this little apartment, with its mismatched furniture and thin walls, you breathe in the life around you, messy, intimate, unfiltered, and undeniably human. You finish your tea and set the cup down gently, savoring the warmth left in your hands. The sounds of your apartment building fade to a soft, background hum, muffled footsteps, the faint buzz of a radio, a laugh that travels through pipes like an echo from another dimension. As you stretch your legs, a familiar thought drifts into your mind, one that bubbles up whenever the day begins, winding toward evening. School. Not today's school. Of course, you're long past worrying about pop quizzes, but the schoolyard you grew up in, the playground where your worldview was shaped with chalk dust, cold fingers, and a curriculum carefully curated to direct your thoughts. School in the Soviet Union wasn't just a place to learn. It was a full-time immersion into a worldview. If the factory built your work ethic, the school built everything else. Your pride, your anxieties, your sense of duty, your occasional rebellious spark, and your deep-seated belief that standing up too fast in winter would make your lungs freeze. You've since discovered this is not scientifically accurate, but childhood rumors die hard. You close your eyes, letting the memory unfold. You're small again, trudging through knee-high snow toward a tall red brick school building with windows that never seem fully clean. Your breath puffs out like steam from an old radiator. You clutch your textbook bag stiff, heavy, and adorned with a faded star that peeled halfway off. Kids scurry past you, scarves flapping wildly, some shouting, some laughing, some crying because someone's homemade mittens just fell in a slushy puddle. Childhood is dramatic everywhere. Inside the school entrance, the air smells like wet wool and chalk. Coats pile up on hooks that threaten to collapse. Hallways are plastered with posters of smiling pioneers and stern leaders. You can almost hear your childhood self sigh as you remember the daily routine. Line up, straighten your uniform, adjust your red pioneer scarf, if you'd earned it, and try to look attentive, even though your stomach is still recovering from that aggressively boiled porridge you had for breakfast. Historians still argue whether the Soviet education system was impressively effective or aggressively persuasive. But you personally recall a mixture of genuine learning, quiet indoctrination, and the ever-present fear of being called to the front of the class to solve a math problem while 30 pairs of eyes judged your every pencil stroke. You can almost hear your teacher's voice as she sweeps into the classroom, a woman with tightly curled hair and glasses that catch the light just enough to make her look perpetually suspicious. She greets everyone crisply, sets down her books with a thud, and immediately begins writing on the chalkboard. Soviet teachers wrote on chalkboards the way artists attack canvases with intensity, conviction, and chalk dust flying like snowflakes. The quirky tidbit that still amuses you: chalk in Soviet schools was constantly in short supply, which meant you sometimes used leftover stubs so tiny they looked like vitamin pills. Teachers, you would pinch them between their fingers with desperate precision, making it look like they were performing tiny surgery on the blackboard. Your memories drift from subject to subject. History class, where everything was framed in a triumphant narrative of struggle and victory, even the boring parts. Literature class, where you recited poetry with passion, even if you didn't fully understand half the metaphors. Physical education, which mostly involved running laps in the cold while pretending to be enthusiastic about it. And then, of course, the schoolyard. The schoolyard was where the unfiltered truth lived. Children whispered about Western jeans, foreign cartoons, and whether chewing gum really came from America or from a black market uncle's mysterious suitcase. You traded stickers, played tag, built snow forts, and dramatically reenacted war movies despite not having actually seen any war movies, because your older brother described them vividly enough to count. You also remember the unwritten rules like how you weren't supposed to complain too loudly, or show too much interest in the wrong topics, or question why the globe in your classroom had certain borders drawn in oddly confident marker. Historians still argue whether students genuinely believed everything they were told, or simply learned to nod quickly to avoid extra homework. You open your eyes again, returning to your present-day apartment, smiling softly at the memory. School shaped so much of who you became: your discipline, your caution, your ability to read between the lines without asking questions aloud. But it also gave you friendships, mischief, running jokes, and the enduring skill of pretending to understand complex math while quietly panicking inside. Your apartment creaks as someone upstairs walks heavily toward their kitchen. The sound pulls you deeper into nostalgia. You think of the old wooden desks, the ink-stained notebooks, the way every classroom felt slightly colder in the morning, even when the radiators clanked furiously like exhausted metal dragons. You remember the pride of earning badges, the dread of parent-teacher meetings, the thrill of exchanging forbidden jokes, the quiet moments of staring out the window instead of listening to grammar rules. You smile again because the truth is simple. Soviet schoolyards may have been shaped by ideology, but they were also shaped by childhood. And childhood always finds a way to color even the strictest places with imagination. You lean back into your sofa bed, letting the memory fade gently like chalk dust settling on a desk. The walls around you hum softly, a reminder that life continues in every apartment around you. You take a slow breath. There's something comforting about remembering where you came from, even if some memories involve uncomfortable uniforms, endless recitations, and chalk shortages that made teachers sigh dramatically. You sip the last of your tea. Your day moves forward, but the echoes of your schoolyard linger warmly soft, nostalgic, and forever a part of you. You set your empty teacup aside and shift your weight on the sofa bed, letting your thoughts flow from the schoolyard into another natural extension of Soviet childhood and young adulthood. The youth organizations that shaped not just daily life, but the rhythm of growing up itself. You weren't just a student. You were a member, a participant, a proud little cog in a much larger generational machine. Whether you liked it or not, the system made sure you marched sometimes literally through its youth ranks. You smile faintly as the memories assemble themselves. The first uniform, the first badge, the first time you tied that bright red pioneer scarf around your neck and felt, for a brief moment, like you'd joined something bigger, something noble, something exciting. It didn't matter that the scarf was itchy, or that your mother spent 20 minutes ironing it into perfect submission, or that your teacher inspected it with the intensity of a military commander. In that moment, you were officially part of the collective future. You close your eyes and picture your childhood self standing straight as a ruler in the school auditorium. Rows upon rows of kids in white shirts, dark skirts or trousers, red scarves, all waiting for the ceremony to begin. The room smelled like polished wood and chalk dust. Your heart thumped loudly, not because you grasped the ideological significance of joining the Vladimir Lenin All-Union Pioneer Organization, but because everyone had told you this was a huge deal. A step toward adulthood, toward responsibility, toward being a good Soviet citizen. Historians still argue whether the pioneer system genuinely instilled values or simply standardized behavior, but you remember the pride, the songs, the badges, the sense of belonging. You learned to march in formation, to sing patriotic songs with enthusiasm, and to participate in community cleanup days subbotniks with debatable enthusiasm. You also learned something else. Uniforms hide many things, including the fact that most kids were mostly just thinking about lunch. Still, there was structure in it, routine, purpose, and for a child, purpose is comforting. Your mind floats further along the timeline, and now you're older, taller, more self-conscious. Your pioneer scarf has been replaced with the blue and white pin of the Komsomol, the Communist Youth League. Joining Komsomol wasn't automatic like the pioneer movement. It was more selective, more prestigious. more like being given a backstage pass to adulthood. You remember how your friends whispered about who would get in, who wouldn't, who pretended not to care but absolutely did. You recall sitting in a classroom where a teacher with stern eyebrows spoke of duty and collective ambition. The Komsomol emblem glinted on her lapel. She listed the organization's expectations: model behavior, political awareness, participation in events. You nodded along. Most people did. You weren't joining a political machine. You were joining your friends, your classmates, your community. It felt like the natural next step. The quirky tidbit you still chuckle about. Komsomol groups organized dances and social events, but the music selection was curated, to say the least. Western songs were frowned upon unless they were instrumentals. You once waltzed awkwardly to what you later learned was an instrumental version of a banned pop song. At the time, it just sounded like something you should try not to step on your partner's foot to. In the mirror of memory, you see yourself volunteering at construction sites, moving bricks, painting fences, clearing debris. The work was real, but so was the camaraderie. You felt like part of a team, a cause, even when that cause was repainting the same wall for the third time because someone decided the shade of beige wasn't beige enough. Of course, there were meetings, lots of meetings. You sat in circles while speeches echoed, around the room, nodding, clapping, occasionally daydreaming about dinner. Someone always took notes. Someone always gave an update about a communal event. Someone always said something inspiring, though you often forgot what it was within minutes. You exhale softly, opening your eyes. The hum of your apartment building fills your ears again. Upstairs, someone turns on a faucet. Down the hall, someone coughs. Your present-day life blends with memories of banners, uniforms, and the rhythmic chant songs of youth ceremonies. You lean back, letting a faint nostalgia wash over you. The pioneer and Komsomol organizations weren't just ideological structures, they were social structures. They gave shape to childhood and adolescence. They taught you cooperation, performance, discipline, and, unofficially, the fine art of looking deeply interested in a meeting while actually thinking about absolutely anything else. Historians still argue whether these organizations uplifted or constrained generations of youth. But your lived experience is simpler. They gave you friendships, adventures, embarrassing stories, awkward dances, badly sewn badges, a shared identity with millions of others. And now, sitting in your quiet Khrushchevka apartment, listening to the soft symphony of communal life around you, you feel the gentle weight of those memories settle like a warm blanket over your mind. Your day continues to drift forward, the past blending seamlessly into the evening. You stretch your back slightly, the kind of slow, end-of-day stretch that feels like it unravels a whole lifetime of tension from your shoulders. Evening settles deeper outside, sinking softly into the streets, and you decide to step out briefly to run one of the most unpredictable errands of Soviet life: shopping. You put on your coat, wrap your scarf twice, and step back into the stairwell. The building hums with familiar noises. Someone is frying onions. Someone else is tuning a radio too loudly. A distant baby wails with the fury of a small revolutionary. You smile, descending the stairs with the quiet resignation of someone who knows exactly what awaits at the shops. Uncertainty wrapped in fluorescent lights. Outside, the cold nips at your cheeks. Snowflakes drift lazily, swirling in the breeze as you head toward the local grocery store, the Producti. The building comes into view, a squat, rectangular shape with windows permanently fogged from the combination of indoor heat and collective sighing. You pull open the heavy door, and a small bell above it jingles with the same exhausted sound it's made since the Khrushchev era. Inside, the store smells faintly of stale bread and industrial cleaning fluid, an oddly nostalgic mix. You take a basket, though you're well aware it will remain mostly empty. Taking a basket is more symbolic than practical, like adopting the mindset of someone who might find oranges someday. You walk down the first aisle, though aisle may be generous. It's more like a corridor lined with shelves that alternate between sparsely stocked and aggressively empty. The bread section is your first stop. Today, you're lucky. A few dark loaves sit on the shelf, their crusts rough and slightly charred. You grab one, squeezing gently to check freshness. It springs back, so you consider that a small victory. Bread shopping in the Soviet Union is essentially gambling, but today you've rolled a good hand. Next, you drift to the dairy section. The shelves hold a modest lineup of items: kefir bottles, some yogurt, Maybe a lonely pack of butter if you're exceptionally fortunate. You scan for butter with the kind of hope normally reserved for lottery tickets. Nothing. A woman next to you mutters, "Figures," then snatches the last kefir as though it personally insulted her. You sigh, but gently. Expectations must always be calibrated. As you wander, you spot the meat counter. Behind the glass lies a collection of items that look more like abstract sculptures than edible protein. Historians still argue whether Soviet meat shortages were due to poor distribution or poor planning, but you know one thing. The butcher's expression has not changed since 1972. He stares at the customers with a look that says, "Ask me for steak. I dare you." You don't dare. The quirky tidbit that comes to mind. Some families kept meticulous mental maps of which stores had better chances for which items. One store might reliably have eggs. Another might have decent cabbage. Another might have canned fish at oddly specific times on Tuesdays. Navigating these unwritten rules was a full-time hobby, yet no guidebook ever existed. You move on to the canned goods section, a few tins of sprats, a few jars of pickles, some unlabeled cans that might contain fruit or might contain disappointment. You grab a tin of something that at least rattles pleasantly. It's a comforting sound, like a promise of calories. At the far end of the store, you spot a small cluster of shoppers gathered around a display case. This is always a sign. You move closer, weaving through the crowd. They're staring at a small shipment of something. Apples. Actual apples. A dozen or so, bruised but beautiful. A scent like faint sweetness fills the air. You manage to grab two. Not out of greed, but because there's a quiet etiquette to these moments. You take only what you reasonably need. You're part of a collective choreography, and no one wants to be the villain in a produce-based tragedy. You head toward the checkout counter, where a woman with short hair and a stern expression stands behind a clunky cash register. She has the vibe of someone who has seen every human emotion and now accepts only exact change and the silent compliance of customers. You place your items on the counter. She rings them up with the speed of someone who has performed this ritual 40,000 times. "Bag?" she asks, monotone. "Yes," you reply. She hands you a thin plastic bag, which tears slightly the moment you place the bread inside. You sigh again, also slightly. When you step back outside, the cold air feels sharper, but also refreshing. You inhale deeply. The streetlights glow through the falling snow, turning the world soft and hazy. As you walk home, you think about the odd satisfaction that comes from a successful Soviet shopping trip, not because you found everything you wanted, but because you navigated the uncertainty with patience, humor, and a bit of luck. Historians still argue whether Soviet shops were a symbol of resourcefulness or inadequacy, but you know the truth is more complicated. The scarcity shaped you. It taught you to savor small wins, to share with neighbors, to accept unpredictability as part of life's texture. When you finally reach your building, you brush snow from your coat and step inside. The warmth of the stairwell envelops you. Someone's playing accordion on the third floor poorly, but passionately. You smirk, climbing the steps with your half-full bag of groceries that somehow feels like a treasure haul. You unlock your door, step inside, and shake off the cold. The lights hum softly overhead. Your apartment feels small but warm, predictable but comforting. You place the bread on the counter, the apples in a bowl, and the mysterious canned item on the table where it belongs as both a meal and a gamble. Shopping may not be glamorous, but it anchors your day, another thread woven into the slow, steady fabric of life in the Soviet Union. You set your groceries on the counter and take a slow breath, letting the quiet of your apartment settle around you. The day has been long, full of errands and echoes, full of people and their small miracles of cooperation. Now, with your bag half emptied and your boots still thawing near the door, another thought drifts into your mind, one of your favorite rituals. Not the grocery run, not the factory routine, not even the black market whisper networks. No, you're craving something warmer, steamier, and infinitely more soothing. The banya. Just thinking the word makes your shoulders drop an inch. It's a place where the grime of the day melts off your skin, where stress evaporates into steam, and where conversations flow as freely as hot water, sometimes philosophical, sometimes hilarious, sometimes dangerously close to gossip. You grab your towel, your soap, and your well-worn felt hat, the little banya cap that looks ridiculous but keeps you from cooking your brain. Then bundle yourself back into your coat. Outside, the evening deepens. Street lamps glow like dim halos over the snow. You walk slowly toward the local bathhouse, your breath fogging the air in soft white clouds. The building comes into view, a modest wooden structure tucked between concrete blocks, its windows glowing with warm condensation. Steam drifts lazily from vents along the side, making it look like the building itself is sighing. Inside the entrance, the air hits you like a warm embrace. The scent of eucalyptus leaves and wet wood fills your lungs. You pay the small fee at the counter, nodding to the attendant who looks like he has seen every human shape, size, and emotional state known to mankind. The changing room is alive with chatter. Men shuffle around in felt slippers, some talking loudly about sports, others whispering about politics with the caution of seasoned survivors. You choose a bench near the corner and change into your banya attire, towel around the waist, cap on your head, soap in hand. The wooden slats beneath your feet feel warm and slightly damp. You open the door to the steam room and step inside. Instantly, your world becomes a soft blur of heat. The air is thick, like a warm blanket you can breathe. Your skin tingles. The steam glows in dim light, swirling gently around the benches and bodies. A man on the top bench lifts a bundle of birch branches, the Venic steams it in hot water, and begins thwacking his friend's back with rhythmic expertise. You smile. Nothing says friendship like consensual tree branch violence. You settle onto the lower bench, letting the heat wrap around your legs. Your muscles sigh with gratitude. Slowly, you inhale the eucalyptus-infused steam, feeling it fill your lungs and soften the tightness in your chest. You exhale just as slowly. This is the Soviet spa experience, not luxurious, not scented with imported oils, but honest and deeply human. A place where class differences evaporate along with the sweat on your skin. Your mind drifts to today's mainstream historical fact. Bathhouses have been part of Slavic culture for centuries, cherished as communal spaces for cleansing, healing, and social bonding. Entire villages planned their weekly routines around banya hours. Families celebrated holidays there. Even political leaders used them as meeting spaces because nothing says productive negotiation like discussing national matters in a room full of steam and half-naked men. Historians still argue whether the banya's origins lie more in necessity or ritual, but you know that in the Soviet era, it served an additional purpose, ensuring cleanliness when many apartments had unreliable or non-existent hot water. Your own building's hot water schedule is so unpredictable it could qualify as a mischievous spirit in folklore. You stretch your arms along the bench. The heat climbs your skin like a gentle tide. Your thoughts slow, the way they often do in places where your body takes the lead and your mind follows behind reluctantly, still carrying the baggage of the day. Near you, an old man clears his throat. "Cold week ahead," he says to no one in particular. Someone else replies, "Every week is cold." Another voice from the top bench adds, "Except when it's too hot." Everyone nods at this profound meteorological insight. The quirky tidbit you recall: in some regions, people swore that a proper banya session could cure anything from colds to heartbreak to bad luck during potato harvest. You're not sure about the potato part, but right now, you'd believe the banya could solve at least half your problems. A man with impressive eyebrows pours a ladle of water onto the hot stones. The steam erupts instantly, billowing through the room like a gentle explosion. Heat surges across your skin, making your pores open like surprised flowers. You inhale sharply, then smile. This is the good part, the moment that feels like a reset button. Someone taps your shoulder. It's a friend from your building. "Venic?" he asks, holding up the birch branches. You chuckle and nod. He gestures for you to lie down, and he begins the rhythmic thwacking light, steady, oddly soothing. The branches smell like forests and cool winds and memories of summers at your uncle's dacha. Even though you're being gently beaten by a plant, you feel like you could fall asleep right here. When he's done, you sit up slowly, sweat running down your temples. The room shimmers in the humidity. Someone jokes that the steam is thick enough to slice and serve with tea. You stand and step outside the steam room into the cooling area. The air is cooler, but still warm enough to feel soft on your skin. A small fountain trickles in the corner. Men sit on benches, sipping tea from enamel cups, discussing soccer scores and rumors about new shipments of winter boots. You pour yourself a cup, the hot liquid warming your throat as your heartbeat settles into a lazy rhythm. For a moment, life feels simple: steam, tea, soft voices, warm wood beneath your feet. When you finally step back outside into the cold night, your skin tingles. Snowflakes land on your still warm shoulders and melt instantly. The night air feels sharper, cleaner, gentler. You walk home slowly, carrying the warmth of the banya inside you like an ember. Another quiet ritual complete. You walk home from the banya with that unmistakable post-steam glow. Your skin warm, your muscles loose, your thoughts drifting in soft little spirals. The cold nips gently at your face, but it feels refreshing now, not cruel. Your breath rises like pale smoke as you make your way back through the quiet streets. The city is calmer at this hour. Windows glow, snow crunches softly. Even the wind seems to whisper instead of howl. Back in your apartment, you hang up your coat, set your towel to dry, and glance at the small calendar pinned beside your kitchen shelf. One date circled in pencil catches your eye, wrapped in a little doodle of a tiny hut with a chimney. Dhaka season. You smile, because no matter how hard the winter, how unpredictable the shortages, how loud the neighbors, or how creaky the radiators, there's one thing that warms the Soviet soul as reliably as a good banya session: escaping to the dacha. You sit for a moment, letting memories swell naturally sun-drenched. Afternoons, buzzing insects, the smell of fresh dill and wet soil. The dacha isn't a luxury villa or a manicured vacation home. It's a little wooden box in the countryside, sometimes leaning slightly to the left, sometimes built by your grandfather with mismatched nails, sometimes surrounded by a fence that looks like it's one strong sneeze away from collapse. But it is freedom. Simplicity. A breath of air untouched by the clatter of factories and the static of loudspeakers. You close your eyes and drift back to the most vivid version of it. It's summer. Not the theatrical kind of summer, just warm enough to peel off your heavy jacket, bright enough to dry your clothes on a line, quiet enough that you can hear birds again. You step off the overcrowded suburban train, carrying bags filled with seeds, bread, maybe a jar of jam your neighbor traded you for fixing her radio last week. The air smells different here, cleaner, softer, alive. You follow a dirt path that winds, between birch trees. The leaves shimmer in the sunlight like they're gossiping. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then decides it's too warm to care. And then your dacha appears. Small, simple, maybe a bit lopsided, but perfect. The door squeaks in greeting. Inside, the walls smell like pine and old newspapers, the insulation material of choice across the entire Soviet Union. Dust motes dance lazily in the sunbeams cutting through the small windows. On the tiny table rests a ceramic cup, chipped but beloved. Outside, a garden stretches across the yard, modest rows of potatoes, onions, carrots, tomatoes, and of course, the sacred holy trinity of herbs: dill, parsley, and dill. There is always more dill than you need. Always. You remember your early mornings there, waking up to the sound of birds instead of factory horns. You walk barefoot to the garden, feeling the damp soil between your toes. You water the plants with an old metal watering can that leaks slightly, forming tiny accidental rainbows in the dirt. You listen to the world breathe around you. Historians still argue whether Soviet dacha culture was born from necessity or tradition, whether they were meant as practical agricultural spaces or spiritual escapes from city monotony. But you know the truth. They were both. They fed your kitchen and your sanity. You think about the evenings sitting outside with friends or family, while the sun slid slow and golden behind the trees. A kettle whistling on a tiny stove. Fresh cucumbers sliced with salt. Conversations wandering from stories to jokes to quiet moments where no one spoke at all. Fireflies blinking in the dark. A sense of peace so rare in the city it felt almost magical. And sometimes, just sometimes, you'd sneak a moment alone, wandering past other dachas. You'd see your neighbors tending their gardens, painting their fences, tinkering with their porches. Everyone had dirt under their fingernails. Everyone looked a little sunburned. Everyone looked a little happier. The quirky tidbit that always makes you smile. Soviet dacha gardening wasn't just a hobby, it was practically a competitive sport. People swapped seeds like foreign currency. They bragged about tomatoes the size of fists. They gossiped about whose cucumbers were suspiciously large, hinting at fertilizer smuggled from a cousin's workplace. A whole underground horticultural black market thrived quietly under the sun. You also remember the jokes like how every Soviet citizen theoretically had a 600 square meters plot, but depending on how lucky your family was, it might have been shaped like a proper rectangle or like a potato that rolled down a hill. Back in your apartment now, you smile at the memory. Dacha life feels warm even in winter. It feels like a different universe inside the same country. A place where you weren't just surviving, you were growing things, shaping things, holding on to little pockets of joy. Historians still argue whether dachas brought people together or encouraged secret hoarding of zucchini. But you know one thing for sure, no matter how grey the city became, how long the queues stretched, or how loud the neighbours yelled about missing scarves, the thought of getting back to your dacha was enough to carry you through almost anything. You take a slow breath. The steam of the banya has faded from your skin, but a warm echo remains inside you, soft, steady, comforting. Tonight, you let your thoughts drift among gardens and birch trees as evening settles quietly over your Khrushchevka. The warmth of your memories lingers as you set down your cup and glance out the window. Night has deepened. Snow drifts steadily under the dim street lamp, settling onto rooftops and balconies with silent persistence. The city glows faintly orange halos around lampposts, thin streaks of light spilling from apartment windows where families gather around tiny tables. The view makes you think of something inevitable. Something every Soviet citizen wrestles with at least 8 months a year. Winter. Not just cold weather, capital W winter, a season with personality, agenda, and zero mercy. You pull your blanket around your shoulders and settle more deeply into your sofa bed. The memories rise like frost creeping up a window pane. Winter wasn't just a season you lived through. It was a season that lived through you. You close your eyes and drift backward in time, letting the sensations return. You are stepping outside your childhood home, bundled in layers so thick you looked like a fabric matryoshka doll. The breath leaves your mouth in a thick cloud. Your eyelashes freeze within minutes. You can't feel your toes by the time you reach the bus stop, even though the bus stop is 40 seconds from your front door. But that's normal. In the Soviet Union, winter was both teacher and bully. It taught you patience, humility, and the fine art of layering clothing with the speed of a pit crew mechanic. Your mind drifts to mornings when the city seemed frozen, solid trams stuck on the tracks, cars coughing like they regretted everything, people shuffling like reluctant penguins. Every step was a negotiation with gravity. Icy sidewalks were the great equalizer. Scientists, factory workers, grandmothers, everyone slipped with the same lack of dignity. You chuckle softly at the mainstream historical facts swirling up in your memory. Some Soviet regions experienced temperatures that dipped so low, school children were excused from class not because of snow, but because the air itself felt like a bad idea. In parts of Siberia, -40 wasn't an extreme, it was Wednesday. Historians still argue whether the Soviet government underestimated the impact of harsh winters on daily life, or simply believed citizens were built of sterner stuff. Judging by your memories of frostbitten fingers and socks drying on every radiator in the apartment, you lean toward the second theory. You shift in your seat, letting another wave of memories wash over you. You recall your apartment on winter mornings, the window panes decorated with lacy frozen patterns, the radiator clanking awake with the reluctance of an overworked metal dragon. Sometimes, you'd place your hands on the radiator for warmth, only to discover it was performing its favorite act, barely functional with the occasional surprise sputter. You pull your blanket tighter and smile at the quirky tidbit that always makes winter feel strangely charming. Families often hung wet laundry near the stove, not to dry it, but to humidify the air. Indoor heating made apartments so dry, your nose felt like it was aging faster than the rest of you. A pot of boiling water sat on every stove, gurgling like a homemade humidifier with dreams of being useful. Nights were something else entirely. The darkness lasted forever, long enough to make you wonder if the sun had simply resigned. You remember walking home in late afternoon while the sky looked like midnight, streetlights flickering above like tired guardians. The snow crunched under your boots, loud and satisfying, the echo bouncing off the faceless concrete walls of the district. You also remember winter rituals that brought unexpected joy. Ice skating on frozen ponds with friends, drinking hot tea from a thermos wrapped in old scarves, helping your father shovel snow from the walkway, pretending the mountain of snow you piled up was a fortress defending your home from frost giants. There was laughter hidden beneath the layers of clothing, warmth buried beneath the cold. But winter had a temper too. You recall the biting wind that sliced through your coat like it had a personal vendetta. The mornings when the bus didn't show up and everyone just shrugged, as if nature had simply declared a temporary strike. The times when your scarf froze to your face and peeling it off felt like losing a thin layer of personality. You, chuckle, shaking your head. Yet, the deeper truth of Soviet winter lies not in the cold, but in the way people adapted, how they wrapped themselves in wool and stubbornness, how they learned to walk on ice with quiet confidence, how they found humor in slipping, warmth in shared tea, and pride in surviving temperatures that would send entire other nations into hibernation. You open your eyes. The present-day room feels warm, soft, and calm. Outside, the faint whisper of wind brushes the window. Winter's hardships shaped you, but so did its quiet beauty. It taught you resilience. It taught you to savor warmth, both literal and metaphorical. And it taught you the strange Soviet truth that sometimes the coldest nights produce the brightest memories. You pull the blanket up under your chin and let the winter drift around you, past and present, merging into a calm, snowy hush. You adjust your blanket, letting it fall across your lap like a heavy winter coat made of fabric memories. The snow outside continues its slow descent, soft and rhythmic, dusting every surface in a gentle whiteness. The warm air inside your apartment nudges your thoughts towards something cozy, something comforting, something that glowed quietly through even the hardest winters and the leanest years. Holidays and rituals. Soviet holidays were a strange, beautiful mix, some deeply cultural, some fiercely ideological, some tenderly personal. And all of them shaped the rhythm of your year in ways you didn't fully appreciate until much later. Your mind drifts to New Year's Eve, the most beloved celebration in the entire Soviet calendar. You smile instantly, not because of fireworks or glamorous outfits or champagne, though those happened in their own modest Soviet ways, but because of the feeling, the electricity in the air, the sense of renewal, the smell of tangerines, if you were lucky enough to find them, filling the apartment like a citrus promise that life could be sweet. You close your eyes and see your childhood living room. A paper garland hangs crookedly across the wall. A tiny tree reel, if you were lucky, cardboard if you weren't, stands proudly in the corner, decorated with shiny Soviet ornaments that were somehow both fragile and indestructible. The lights flicker, not because they're charmingly vintage, but because the wiring in your building is older than most of your relatives. Your family bustles around the kitchen. The table groans under plates of salad, vinaigrette, shuba, and the sacred, eternally present Olivier. That salad was half holiday, half institution, potatoes, peas, pickles, and sausage, mixed with enough mayonnaise to plaster a small wall. You know it well. Everyone knew it well. The quirky tidbit rises. Some people swore their family's version of Olivier was superior because of a secret ingredient, which always turned out to be either more pickles or fewer pickles. The debates were endless, passionate, and oddly patriotic. At 11:55 p.m., everyone turned on the television to watch the Kremlin clock tower chime. Even though the TV picture was fuzzy and the sound crackled like it was traveling through 3 layers of snow, no one dared miss it. It wasn't just a ritual, it was a national heartbeat. Historians still argue whether New Year's Eve became Russia's biggest celebration because of deliberate state policy or because people needed something joyful that wasn't tied to ideology. But you know that for you, it was simple. It was the one night when the whole country seemed to exhale at the same time. Your thoughts drift to May Day, Den Trude. The parades were enormous throngs of people marching with red banners, music blaring, slogans shouted. You remember the excitement of getting a balloon from your school committee, the smell of spring thaw in the air, the feeling of being part of something grand even if you didn't quite understand what it all meant. Loudspeakers broadcast, cheerful speeches praising workers. Children waved paper flowers. Adults smiled politely and tried not to step on each other's heels. You also remember how the celebration didn't end with ideology. After the official parade, families spilled into parks, grilling skewers of meat on makeshift grills, sharing stories, playing games. It was half ceremony, half picnic, a day when the country felt big and small at the same time. Then there was Victory Day, May 9th, quiet, heavy, sacred. You remember your grandmother brushing off her medals with trembling hands. You remember veterans gathering near monuments, carrying flowers, wearing faded uniforms that still fit, somehow. You remember songs soft, nostalgic, aching. Victory Day wasn't loud. It was deep. Even as a child, you felt its gravity. But not all holidays were public. You smile faintly at the memory of name days or small family rituals. Even in a secular, tightly controlled society, people found ways to celebrate, quietly gathering for dinners, sharing stories, lighting candles that no one talked about too loudly. Rituals slipped through the cracks like warm light under a door. And then there were the funny household traditions that belonged to no official calendar at all. Like the night in winter when your family baked cookies shaped vaguely like stars, circles, and interpretive blobs. Or the summer evening when everyone gathered on the Dutcher porch to count shooting stars seriously pretending, that each one granted a wish, even though no one dared admit it. Or the ritual of making tea after a long day, which was less a beverage and more a national emotional support system. Back in your apartment, you breathe in slowly, letting the weight of memory soften the edges of the present moment. Holidays and rituals in the Soviet Union didn't always shine with glitter and sparkle. They weren't drenched in luxury or wrapped in excess, but they were threaded with care, structure, and community. They anchored people. They soothed the ache of shortages. They filled the silence of winter nights. They made life feel bigger than daily routines. Historians still argue whether Soviet rituals were designed to unify or to distract. But to you, they did something simpler. They made the year feel full, predictable, warm. You shift your blanket again and smile, feeling the glow of 1,000 old celebrations linger like golden dust in the air. Your thoughts drift gently from holidays to the quieter rhythms that filled the evenings between them. The things you turned to when the day was done, when the factory noise faded, when the queues were behind you, when the banya steam had worn off, when the streets outside your Khrushchevka grew dark and still. Entertainment in the Soviet Union wasn't flashy, abundant, or endlessly customizable like it is today. It was curated, limited, sometimes accidental, but somehow that limitation made every scrap of entertainment feel precious, like finding a small patch of sunlight in a long winter. You shift your blanket, settle deeper into the warmth of your apartment, and let the memory of those evenings unfold. The first thing that comes to mind is the television, that sturdy, boxy creature with rabbit ear antennas and a tendency to go fuzzy at the exact worst moment. When you turned it on, it hummed like it was powering up for interstellar travel. The screen would flicker, then stabilize into a slightly crooked image that always seemed to be arguing with the signal. Even with its quirks, the TV was a beloved companion. You'd flip between the handful of available channels, some broadcasting news, some children's programs, some old movies, and occasionally that mesmerizing ballet performance that made you feel cultured even if you didn't understand the plot. The quirky tidbit you still chuckle at. Whenever a foreign film aired, it was often dubbed by a single male voice, speaking monotonously over every character. Men, women, children, everyone. A single bored narrator telling the entire story. You didn't just watch the movie, you survived it. Historians still argue whether Soviet TV programming was meant to educate, entertain, or gently steer public opinion. But all you know is that when New Pagodi came on, your entire building turned into synchronized viewers. A wolf, a hare, and slapstick humor were enough to unite the nation for 12 glorious minutes. But sometimes TV wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed something with a bit more edge. Something unapproved. Something whispered about at school or at the factory. You think of bootleg records, the legendary magnetized tapes passed from hand to hand like precious contraband. Western rock music recorded over old tapes, sometimes so poorly that you could hear faint traces of the original audio beneath the beat. If you were lucky, the quality was tolerable. If you were unlucky, it sounded like the Rolling Stones were performing from inside a washing machine. And then there were the X-ray records, those strange, ghostly discs made from discarded medical X-rays, images of rib cages and skulls, etched with grooves of forbidden jazz or rock and roll. You'd play them on an old turntable and watch a skeleton dance as the music crackled through the room. Nothing felt more rebellious or more oddly poetic. You exhale softly, smiling at the memory of huddling close to a tape recorder, turning the volume low, listening to bands you technically weren't supposed to know existed. Historians still debate how much Western culture actually influenced Soviet youth. But you know that even a warped Beatles track heard at half speed felt like a window cracked open to another world. Books were another escape, especially the ones that didn't officially exist. You remember samizdat, the underground network of handwritten or typewritten manuscripts passed from hand to hand, each copy carefully made, each reader sworn to keep it quiet. You held those pages like they were warm, illicit treasures. The ink usually smudged your fingers. The margins were always uneven. But the stories, the stories they felt alive in a way polished, state-approved literature rarely did. Reading samizdat with the curtains drawn, listening for footsteps in the stairwell, felt like being let in on a secret. You weren't defying the state, you were feeding your mind something it hungered for. But not all entertainment was secretive or serious. You remember long evenings playing dominoes or durac at the kitchen table, slapping pieces onto the board with dramatic flair, laughing when the cards conspired against you, arguing about rules that had been passed down semi-accurately from grandparents. Everyone cheated just a little, because in the Soviet Union, cheating at cards was a tradition, not a crime. You also remember gathering around to listen to the radio, especially late at night when the airwaves carried foreign broadcasts if you tuned the dial just right. Those crackling frequencies felt like forbidden worlds whispering to you from beyond the horizon. Sometimes you understood every word, sometimes you understood nothing at all. But the act of listening, straining to catch a phrase or a melody, was thrilling. Entertainment wasn't about abundance, it was about discovery. It was about finding joy in the small, the scarce, the improvised. A movie, night with friends, a radio comedy show, a puzzle passed down through 3 generations, a neighbor lending you a book with a conspiratorial wink, a game played on the floor with mismatched pieces, laughter echoing through thin walls. You stretch your legs beneath the blanket and breathe deeply. Evenings in the Soviet Union weren't filled with endless choices, but they were filled with presence, with community, with stolen moments of joy carved out of simplicity. You look around your apartment, the dim lamp, the soft shadow of your bookshelf, the distant hum of a neighbor's radio, and you feel that old softness returning, the quiet contentment of finding comfort wherever you can. Entertainment in those days wasn't about escaping life. It was about feeling it, together. You shift your weight, blanket pulled loosely around your shoulders, and let your mind drift into another essential thread of Soviet life, one that everyone experienced sooner or later, willingly or not. A system both admirable and exasperating, both reassuring and unpredictable. A system where you could get medical care for free, but also wait 4 hours for someone to tell you to drink hot tea and rest. Healthcare, the Soviet way. You exhale slowly, and the memory settles in like the smell of disinfectant in a clinic hallway. You picture yourself standing at the entrance of the polyclinic, a concrete block of a building with peeling paint and a faded red cross on the door. The wind pushes at your back, as if encouraging you inside. You know what awaits. Long lines, stern nurses, soft rubber flooring that squeaks under winter boots, and a waiting room filled with coughing, stoic citizens wrapped in layers of wool. You step through the doorway and, instantly, the smell hits you. That universal medical scent, antiseptic, rubber gloves, maybe a faint hint of stale pastries someone smuggled into their shift. The receptionist barely looks up, her expression conveying the eternal vibe of someone who has processed far too many appointment slips in one lifetime. "Passport?" she asks without inflection. You hand it over. She stamps something with bureaucratic thunder and gestures toward a hallway. As you walk, the fluorescent lights flicker overhead, casting your shadow across posters, encouraging citizens to avoid smoking, drink less vodka, and somehow maintain perfect health even during winters that could freeze your eyebrows off. A man seated in a chair coughs with enough force to shake the walls. A child nearby sneezes, then proudly announces it. His mother sighs deeply into her scarf. You find your way into the waiting room, wooden benches, coats piled everywhere, a single potted plant clinging to life like a botanical hero. You take a seat between 2 women gossiping about shortages in the pharmacy and an old man reading a tattered newspaper from last month. This is healthcare Soviet style, slow, crowded, earnest, and somehow comforting in its familiarity. Quirky tidbit bubbles up. You can't help but grin. Some clinics were so short on equipment that nurses sterilized glass syringes by boiling them in pots that looked suspiciously like the ones used in communal kitchens. You remember watching steam rise from a pot and thinking it looked strangely like the kettle at home. After a long wait, long enough for you to memorize the ceiling tiles and contemplate your entire existence, you hear your name. The doctor calls you in with a voice that is professional but clearly exhausted. You enter a small office containing 1 desk, 2 chairs, and medical equipment that looks like it belongs in a museum. A faded poster of anatomical drawings hangs crookedly on the wall. The doctor, usually wearing a white coat that has survived several ideological shifts, motions for you to sit. He asks questions in a tone that suggests he already knows the answers, because everyone's symptoms boil down to the same 4 categories in winter: cough, fever, fatigue, or existential dread. You describe your symptoms. He nods, checks your temperature, and says the classic phrase, "Ah, a mild infection. Drink hot tea and rest." You wait for more. Surely there must be more. He hands you a prescription slip. It looks official, but you already know what it says. Rest, tea, maybe aspirin, if the pharmacy gods are merciful. Historians still argue whether the Soviet healthcare system was a triumph of free access or a labyrinth of underfunding. But you remember it fondly in its own way. It worked not always quickly, not always elegantly, not always with the latest equipment, but it worked with heart. And sometimes, it worked with surprising efficiency. You think of that one time you sprained your ankle at a construction volunteer day. You limped into the clinic, and within minutes, a nurse wrapped your ankle with acrobatic precision, gave you a stern lecture about not climbing unstable ladders, and sent you home with instructions to apply. Vodka compresses not the drinking kind, the medicinal kind. Though the line between those two was famously thin. You remember school clinics with their little bottles of iodine and cotton swabs, workplace checkups where doctors asked routine questions with the exact same intonation every time, ambulances that arrived slowly but bravely through winter storms. You also remember the pharmacy shelves, half full, half empty, always an adventure. You could find bandages, soap, stomach tablets, and sometimes even proper antibiotics, though those required navigating a bureaucratic maze that made you feel like you were attempting espionage. As you sit in the present moment, tucked under your blanket, you realize something. Soviet healthcare wasn't about luxury. It was about collective care, rough around the edges, but anchored in the idea that medical help was a right, not a market commodity. It taught you patience. It taught you resilience. It taught you to drink far more hot tea than medically necessary. You stretch your legs, letting your blanket fall slightly, and smile softly. Somewhere in your building, a neighbor coughs loudly, another echoes with a sneeze, and a third slams a cabinet door for reasons unknown. Life continues, health wavers. But the memory of those long clinic hallways with their flickering lights and determined nurses remains strangely warm. Even in a system that lacked much, the people inside those clinics gave what they could, and that made all the difference. You pull the blanket a little tighter around your shoulders, feeling the softness settle against your arms as the apartment creaks quietly around you. The radiator sighs. A pipe clinks somewhere behind the wall. Far above, someone drags a chair across their kitchen floor with all the subtlety of a small earthquake. These sounds blend together into a familiar evening lullaby, unintentional, a little chaotic, but comforting in its own messy way. And it makes you think of the people who produce these sounds. The voices, the footsteps, the doors opening and shutting, the quiet coughs and loud arguments, the whispered secrets and heavy silences, neighbors, gossip, surveillance. In the Soviet Union, these weren't just occasional elements of life, they were pillars of your social landscape. Invisible architecture, stronger than concrete. You take a slow breath, letting the memories unfurl. You picture your building as it was years ago, the same narrow stairwell, the same chipping paint, the same bulletin board pinned with notices about pipe repairs and lost keys. But more importantly, the same human ecosystem, humming within its walls. Every Khrushchevka was its own tiny universe, and every resident was an amateur astronomer tracking everyone else's orbits. Because here's the truth. Soviet neighbors knew everything. Who bought new shoes, who suddenly had relatives visiting, who brought home a suspiciously heavy bag from the black market, who owned a radio slightly too nice for their station at work, who whispered too quietly in the stairwell, who slammed their door a little too passionately at 10 p.m. You weren't being paranoid. You were being observant, because everyone else was watching you too. Your mind drifts to an ordinary evening long ago, your young self standing in the stairwell, fumbling with the latch on the mailbox. Behind you, the door to apartment 32 opens just enough for an eye to peek out. "Good evening," comes the voice you recognize instantly. It's Tatiana Petrovna, unofficial queen of the stairwell, guardian of the collective conscience, and reigning champion of unsolicited commentary. She doesn't step fully into view, just enough to monitor your general aura. "Good evening," you say politely. Her eyes narrow slightly. "You're home late." You smile. "Long day at work," she huffs. Make sure you don't catch cold. People are dropping like flies." That's her version of it. Kindness. You accept it with a nod. Historians still argue whether social supervision in Soviet life was a result of ideological pressure or simply generations of communal living habits. But it felt like both. People weren't always spying. Sometimes they were just invested, deeply, excessively, enthusiastically. You take a sip of tea and let the warmth flood your chest. There were different categories of neighbors. The loud ones, who fought, sang, danced, and rearranged furniture at ungodly hours. The quiet ones, who moved like gentle spirits and somehow produced children who screamed like goats. The borrowers, who asked for sugar, salt, soap, tools, advice, and occasionally your emotional stability. The gossipers, who collected information like some people collect stamps. The informers, who took notes literally. The watchers, who never said much but missed nothing. The kind-hearted, who always left soup on your doorstep when you were sick. And sometimes these categories overlapped spectacularly. You recall the quirky tidbit every Soviet child grew up hearing: walls have ears, which sounded dramatic until the first time you actually overheard your upstairs neighbor criticize the Ministry of Culture through the heating pipes. The Soviet Union had created an entire generation of people who instinctively lowered their voices when discussing absolutely anything, even the weather, just in case. Of course, some of this was justified, some of it wasn't, and some of it sits in that blurry middle space where human nature and caution intermingle like two dancers who can't decide on the next step. You stretch your feet under the blanket, letting your toes warm up. Your building wasn't unique. Everywhere, people talked, not just casually but with intention. Gossip wasn't just small talk, it was a survival strategy. Information kept you safe, informed, connected. It helped you navigate shortages, rumors, opportunities, and dangers. It helped you interpret the silent subtext of daily life that rarely made it into official announcements. But then there was the other side, the watchfulness that carried an edge. You remember a neighbor quietly pulling you aside once, whispering with urgency, "Don't say that too loudly." You remember a co-worker pausing mid-sentence because someone unfamiliar walked into the room. You remember the subtle shift in tone when conversations turned too political, too analytical, too honest. Historians still argue how widespread actual surveillance was, how many informers existed, how much fear was justified. But for the average person, fear wasn't measured in statistics. It was measured in instinct. You learned to read the room, to weigh every word, to nod without committing, to speak in metaphors when sincerity felt dangerous, to trust but cautiously. And yet, despite the tension, despite the whispers, despite the constant awareness, you also remember something warm. The laughter in stairwells, the shared holidays, the communal repairs when pipes burst, the late-night knocks for sugar, or help or comfort, the neighbor who watched your cat when you traveled, the ones who greeted you with genuine affection, the ones who helped raise you without ever being asked. The Soviet neighborhood was a paradox, half pressure cooker, half safety net, half scrutiny, half solidarity. You shift your blanket once more, easing deeper into its warmth. Your building might not have had privacy, it might not have had quiet, it might not have had anonymity, but it had people. Real people. Imperfect, busy, nosy, loyal people. A community in the rawest sense of the word. You smile softly, letting the memory settle. Life in the Soviet Union may have been watched, whispered about, monitored, and mapped, but it was never lonely. And the hum of your building tonight feels like an echo of that truth. You settle deeper into your sofa bed, blanket pulled higher, the room warmed by the soft hum of the radiator. Outside, the snow still falls in slow, drifting flakes, turning the world into a quiet watercolor. And inside your chest, something gentler begins to stir, a memory not of hardship, not of queues or shortages or whispered caution, but of the small, luminous joys that kept you going. Because here's the truth no historian ever captures fully. Life in the Soviet Union wasn't just struggle. It was also moments of unexpected warmth, tiny embers that glowed bright enough to light whole chapters of your life. You close your eyes and drift into that softer current. The first memory that surfaces is music. Not the sanctioned state choir kind, not the bootleg Western rock you listen to at low volume, but the spontaneous kind, the kind that erupted in kitchens late at night. Someone would pull out a guitar, someone else would hum a melody, and suddenly the room filled with songs older than the building itself. Songs about love, snow, rivers, and roads. Songs everyone knew by heart, even if no one remembered learning them. You remember sitting at a crowded table, knees touching, tea glasses steaming, a candle flickering because the electricity had decided to take an unscheduled break, and someone, maybe your cousin, maybe a neighbor, strummed a quiet tune that made the whole room fall still. You watched the glow dance across people's faces, and for a moment, everything felt soft and possible. Historians still argue whether music was a form of subtle rebellion or simple escapism, but you know it was neither and both. It was connection. A thread tying people to one another when everything else felt frayed. Your thoughts drift next to friendship, that steady, constant, woven into the rhythm of your days. Not the modern kind, effortless and digital, but the grounded kind formed through shared hardships, shared cues, shared chores, shared banya rituals. The kind forged by standing in a line together for 3 hours to buy a single loaf of bread, talking about nothing and everything at once. You remember your closest friend from the factory, his wild mustache and louder laugh. How the two of you developed a silent language of glances to survive long meetings. How you shared cigarettes behind the warehouse even after you both promised to quit. How you once spent 4 hours carrying lumber for the factory construction brigade, complaining the entire time, yet laughing so hard your stomach hurt. Moments like those stitched your life with bright, durable thread. You shift slightly under your blanket, feeling warmth settle into your bones. Your mind wanders to simple treats, tokens of joy in a world often ruled by scarcity. Like the time you managed to buy fresh tangerines for New Year's, the scent filled your whole apartment, sweet and sharp, turning the holiday into something radiant. Or that rare afternoon when someone brought home real chocolate from abroad. You didn't eat it. You savored it like treasure, breaking it into tiny squares, making it last as long as humanly possible. Or the time your mother surprised you with kefir ice cream on a summer evening, the sun dipping behind rooftops as you sat on a stoop licking your cone faster than it could melt. These weren't just snacks, they were celebrations. You exhale slowly, letting your thoughts drift further. You picture summer nights, the ones at the dacha or in the courtyard of your building. Evenings filled with the smell of cut grass, children racing around with sticky hands, adults chatting with folded arms and relaxed eyes. Someone grilling something on a homemade metal contraption that was definitely not approved by any safety authority. Someone else passing around homegrown cucumbers like precious jewels. The quirky tidbit surfaces. In some neighborhoods, people formed unofficial courtyard choirs. Not formal groups, just clusters of neighbors who would sing together after dark. Those harmonies drifted through windows, climbed stairwells, and softened even the sternest hearts. Joy wasn't scheduled. It wasn't advertised. It slipped quietly into life whenever it found space. Sometimes it came from books when you found a novel you'd been searching for. Its pages rough, its spine cracked, but its story perfect. You read it slowly, savoring it like it might evaporate. Sometimes it came from snowfalls, the thick, silent kind that transformed the city overnight into something magical. You'd step outside and feel like the world had been washed clean. Sometimes it came from romance, small gestures, shared glances, handwritten notes slipped into pockets, walks home through quiet streets where the only sound was the crunch of snow beneath 2 pairs of boots. And sometimes, joy came from absolutely nothing. From sitting at your kitchen table with a cup of tea, from watching the light shift on the walls, from listening to the distant laughter of neighbors, from the simple knowledge that, somehow, despite everything, you were still here. Historians debate the politics, the structures, the inefficiencies, but they rarely talk about moments like these, moments where life felt unexpectedly soft, human, warm, beautiful in its own unpolished way. You pull the blanket up to your chin, letting the memories settle like snowflakes in slow motion. The room feels still, safe, familiar. You breathe deeply, comforted by the knowledge that even in a world shaped by limits, the heart always found room for joy. Real joy. The kind that lingers. You take a long, slow breath, letting it drift out like steam rising from a cup of tea. The room is dim now, just the soft glow of your lamp, spreading a warm circle across the floor and your blanket tucked snugly around your legs. Outside, the wind hums gently against the window pane, not quite fierce, not quite quiet, just steady, just there. And you find yourself moving toward the end of your Soviet day, the slow, inevitable fade into evening, when the world softens and your mind loosens its grip on all the little worries that fill daylight hours. This is the time when the city exhales. You step to your window and glance outside. Snow falls in soft, ragged clusters under the orange street lamp. Each flake drifts lazily, dancing in its own tiny spiral before settling on mailboxes, railings, chimneys, and rooftops. The district looks sleepy, curtains drawn, balconies empty, stairwell windows glowing faintly like small square moons. You close the curtain, and the room darkens to a cozy hush. Your apartment welcomes you into evening mode, quiet, intimate, familiar. The clink of your mug as you set it down, the subtle crackle of your radiator, the rustle of your blanket as you wrap it more snugly around your shoulders, the dim circle of lamplight that makes everything feel safe and close. You move through your little kitchen with practiced ease. The kettle rattles cheerfully as it comes to life again, its steam fogging the window for the third time today. You don't rush. You don't hurry. You let the ritual unfold slowly, as if time itself has thickened. A spoonful of loose tea, the gentle clink of glass, the swirl of dark amber liquid. This is how Soviet evenings always begin. Not extravagant, not loud, just quiet comfort. You sit again, letting the cup warm your palms. The quiet hum of your building floats around you, muffled footsteps in the hall, a distant laugh, someone clattering dishes 2 floors up, someone's radio murmuring a song too soft to recognize. Life continues, but gently now, wrapped in wool and evening stillness. You take a sip. The tea is simple, but the warmth spreads through you, an earthy, familiar heat that settles deep, softening the edges of your thoughts. You think about your day, the queues, the tram, the factory hum, the dinner you improvised from what the stores did and didn't have. You think about your neighbors nosy, helpful, annoying, endearing. You think about the birch branch steam of the banya, the faint citrus smell of memories from holidays past, the laughter around kitchen tables, the music that wove itself around your life like thread. And as you sit there, letting your mind drift through all those small, ordinary moments, you realize that this exact quiet is what made life livable. Not the slogans, not the speeches, not the ideology. The quiet moments, the slow evenings, the soft rituals. You let out a long exhale, the kind that feels like it empties the entire day from your lungs. Historians still argue whether Soviet evenings were peaceful or simply exhausted. But you know that when the sun dipped beyond the rooftops and the lamps flickered on, the whole city seemed to agree on one truth. This was the hour to rest, to breathe, to be human. You look around your small apartment, your mismatched cups, your worn blanket, your crooked shelf lined with books, the little plant trying desperately to survive on limited sunlight. It's all modest, all humble, but it's yours. And in this system, having a small corner of the world that belongs to you feels quietly victorious. You sip your tea again, slower this time. Outside, the city fades further into silence. Inside, your heartbeat steadies. Your day settles behind you like snow settling on branches, and you, tired, warm, wrapped in your blanket, let yourself ease gently into the night. Now that your day in the Soviet Union has unfolded from morning frost to evening quiet, let everything inside you begin to soften. Let the pace slow. Let the words stretch out into something gentle, something warm, something that settles over your thoughts like a soft wool blanket. The lamp glows faintly beside you, its light thinning as the room grows still. Outside, snow continues its slow drift downward, each flake falling with unhurried purpose. You can almost hear it landing tiny whispers, decorating the rooftops, the roads, the bare branches of trees resting for the night. Breathe in slowly, feeling your chest rise, your shoulders loosen, your jaw unclench. The air feels warmer now, calmer now, softened by everything you've lived through in this quiet story. And as you exhale, imagine the day slipping gently away, like footprints being covered by fresh snow. Your mind drifts like that snow unrushed, drifting where it wants, settling where it chooses. Whatever weight you carried today, let it fade now. Let it sink into the background the way distant city noise dissolves at night. You picture your little Khrushchevka apartment dim, cozy, safe. The kettle cooling, the blanket warming your legs, the faint hum of a radiator working just hard enough. The world outside slowing, quieting, falling into its own deep sleep, and you feel yourself sinking too slowly, softly into that same stillness. Your breath deepens, your eyelids grow heavier, your body grows warm and comfortably heavy. There is nothing left to do, nowhere left to go, nothing to fix or worry about. Just rest, just quiet, just the gentle drift towards sleep. Let the softness take you.